Welcome back, WNST. A rude awakening for each and every one of us who is a Ravens fan this week of watching the Jacksonvilles and the Nashvilles and the Kansas Cities and the Buffaloes, let me not forget them, all not only celebrate at the feet of the Ravens and their defeat at the hands of the Cincinnati Bengals, but the times they are changing, and we will be discussing them at length. Luke Jones now joins us, of course, our insider for all things Ravens. And Luke, there ain't no more inside of the Ravens, right? I mean, they busted up on Monday morning. Dean Pease has announced his retirement. He's cleaned his desk out, and onward and upward. And the new era of Ravens football begins. And we don't even know what Bisciotti's thinking, but certainly if Harbaugh is sticking around, if this Ozzie DaCosta group is sticking around, the first charge of business for Harbaugh is going to be to find somebody to run the defense.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what other changes could be coming to the staff, and certainly we'll debate Marty Morningwig and Greg Roman and anyone else they might add, anyone else they might lose. But we know for sure they need a new defensive coordinator, and I think it's going to be interesting. This is, the timing of this, there are some very clear-cut candidates that have ties to the Ravens but have gone elsewhere that really jump off the page. And I think Chuck Pagano is the first one. First of all, we wait and see if he wants to coach in 2018. You would assume he's not going to get any consideration for a head coaching vacancy elsewhere at this point, with the way that things went in Indy the last couple of years with Andrew Luck on the sideline. So he's kind of the one outside candidate that jumps off the page. There's others, certainly guys like Terrell Alston, who was the Ravens secondary coach and had been in Detroit the last few years. Vic Fangio, who goes back, even to the Brian Billick era, having been here in Baltimore, and Ted.
I know Vic.
Yeah, I mean Ted Monachino. You've got some names of guys.
Spagnuolo's another guy that's been around, right?
Yeah, Spagnuolo. I'm guessing. Because he wasn't here all that long, but certainly has a relationship with John Harbaugh. And I know fans have talked about Marvin Lewis, Jack Del Rio. Well, who knows? Marvin might be sticking around in Cincy now. But the big name as far as in-house candidates, and I think this is the name to look at when you consider the Ravens, other than hiring Marvin Lewis, who had been the Steelers linebackers coach in 1995, to become the Ravens' first defensive coordinator, the Ravens have always filled that position internally. From Mike Nolan to Rex Ryan to Greg Madison to Chuck Pagano to Dean Pease. It's always been someone on staff, and if that trend continues, you look at Wink Martindale, who's been the Ravens' linebackers coach for the last 6 years, spent 1 year in Denver as their defensive coordinator, with a defense that struggled. There's no way to sugarcoat that, but Wink is very much respected by guys like C.J. Mosley. Zach Orr gave him the utmost respect and credit for his development into a Pro Bowl caliber linebacker at least. And he's the guy that you look at as far as in-house choices. But I think this is a really interesting job from a standpoint of if it is someone from the outside coming in. Everyone knows that John Harbaugh's maybe not on the best footing that he was on 3-4 years ago.
Oh, there's no doubt he's on different footing.
Yeah,
right?
So you always have that factor, but at the same time, this is a really talented defense. It is, and I know people don't necessarily want to hear that right now after the 4th and 12 choke, and that's what it was. I mean, I don't use that term lightly, but this defense choked at the end of the season, and it cost him a playoff spot. But I think there is an appeal to whether it's someone returning to the organization, whether it's Wink Martindale, or whether it's someone we're not even talking about. And maybe John Harbaugh has identified someone else that isn't on the radar but is really appealing. I think
there have always been a bunch of buddies of his that, like Pat Shurmur, as an example, and to some degree, some of these guys don't like working that close because they have to fire each other, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of that goes on, too, but it has been fascinating over 20 years. I mean, I had 3 dear friends of mine fired on Sunday night, right? Literally, I mean, that's how long I've been at this, and I still I know their wives, I know their families, I know their dedication, I know how excited they were the day they got there and all that, and you remember the first day that John Harbaugh got here, but boy, we're getting closer to to the end in the beginning, right? And now we're spinning the wheel and saying, how attractive a job is this at this point for anyone at this point?
Yeah, well, and that's why I said this is a unique situation. I think you absolutely question how attractive the Ravens' offensive coordinator job would be if they don't bring back Marty Morningwig, and we'll see what happens there. But I think there is a lot of appeal to being the Ravens' defensive coordinator. If nothing else, look at the previous defensive coordinators who then got head coaching positions. And as much as you can point to the Ravens collectively and say, well, it's a lot of mediocrity over the last 4 or 5 years, you still look at that defense, and did they live up to expectations this year? No, from a standpoint of you saw what happened in Pittsburgh, and you saw what happened against Cincinnati on the final drive. And statistically, yeah, they were top 10 in most categories, but guys like me who saw this offseason how it played out with all the draft picks, all the major free agent dollars were pumped into this defense, probably should have been a top 3 or 4 unit rather than just a top 10 unit, but there's still a lot of talent there. So I think there is some appeal that this job, specifically the defensive coordinator job, can still be a springboard kind of a job if you're someone that has head coaching aspirations. And I would assume Chuck Pagano wants to be a head coach again at some point, if that ends up being the guy. Terrell Austin, his name has been brought up as a head coaching candidate, even though didn't necessarily have great defenses in Detroit his entire tenure there under Jim Caldwell. But I think anyone who comes into this job as the Ravens defensive coordinator, you're walking into a pretty good situation in terms of the players that you have. Now, the head coach and the overall stability level of the organization is in question far more than it's been in the past. But there's a lot of talent to work with there. So I think that job has a lot of appeal. And as much as you look at this situation and as much as we talked about it last offseason and debated whether John Harbaugh kept Marty Morningwig because there wasn't anyone outside that he could bring in that he felt was going to be markedly better that wanted the job, I think you can absolutely identify some candidates and look at the overall talent level on this defense and say, hey, regardless of what's going on with the organization as a whole, there's a lot to like here about this defense, and I think there's no reason why they shouldn't find a good person to be that defensive coordinator. And by the way, they might decide that it's Wink Martindale, and he might do a really, really good job. And I think part of this, and you know that I've been a Dean Pease bigger supporter of him than others in town over the last few years, but I think especially after what happened at the end of the season, I think there absolutely is an argument to be made for some fresh blood there, a new set of eyes on that defense, someone else speaking into the headset, into C.J. Mosley's helmet, and some just a little bit of a more fresh approach there, a fresher approach there, a new look there. That maybe that's the difference in this defense going from good to great. And in that case, I don't think there's necessarily one right man for the job, but you do need to find a right man for the job. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, whether it is Wink Martindale and they just go the internal route again, which I'm sure from a fan standpoint and understanding the overall temperature of this team as far as it ranks with its fan base, that's not going to get people nearly as excited as bringing back a Chuck Pagano, who obviously is a big name, obviously had a lot of success in, albeit, and I'll remind everyone, 1 year as defensive coordinator here in Baltimore. I think that's the kind of splash hire that you could make that isn't going to bring everyone back to the seats in the stadium, but I think would get people a little more excited about this defense that does have a lot of talent still.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. Of course, if there is any breaking news, you'll get it first on our WNST text service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5, and I'm sure we will be discussing wild cards and divisions and heading off to the Super Bowl. Luke and I will be there. Between now and then, we're going to broadcast some Coppin State basketball for you. Juan Dixon joins us here weekly, and as the MEAC conference games get going here, and, of course, Luke and I will be covering some Terps as well. CoppenStateSports.com is where you get all that information. Dwayne Burrows on the ladies' side will be joining us as well. I want to remind everybody about Compass Point Golf Course in Pasadena. I know we've had some cold days here to begin 2018, but the minute that it gets civil outside, it is your best place to play. We get that first 45, 50-degree day. You won't get the windbreak around. It is a great course close to home. You can learn more at CompassPointGolf.com. Also got to tell you about our friends at Costas Inn. Good enough for the Today Show. My mom, fat crabs, cold beer, many Dundalk friends gathering there during the holidays. I saw them out on my timeline. The legend continues. CostasInn.com if you need yourself a crab cake or some pit beast as we get into 2018, and a hot cup of crab soup and cream of crab. I've never seen that before. You mix the cream of crab and the crab soup. Luke, you ever done that before? Mix cream of crab and crab soup together?
I have, the 50-50. I like that.
That's a new thing, man. We didn't have that when I was a kid, you know?
It's the first time I heard of that, because my sister got it at a restaurant here in town, and didn't appeal to me. It's good. I like
Don Moeller talked me into it at Costas the night I went into the Dundalk Hall of Fame. So it was the first night I had ever had it. So I don't know. I mean, it's like mixing the streams. You know what I mean? It's like sweet and spicy. Pick one. You know, I don't need both. You know,
it's really good for those fence sitters out there, right? Want the Maryland crab, cream of crab. We'll just have both.
Well, I mean, and in this case, we're talking about defensive coordinators. You can't have them all. You know, like you can't have Marvin Lewis and Mike Pettin and Chuck Pagano and Steve Spagnuolo and Rex Ryan and Wink Martin. You know, oh, by the way, and Terrell Austin, because, I mean, these are all names that not only you've dropped or I've dropped, but in an era where John Gruden's going to go back and coach again, right? I don't know, really. I mean, I spent a couple of hours with Marvin Lewis over the weekend. I don't know if he would want to be a defensive. I don't mean working for John, but I mean just from a job standpoint. I don't know where Mike Pettin is in his life. I know he lost his dad last year. I know all of these guys have made far more money. You know, Marvin and I were talking about this 20 years ago where we came into this thing. He and I were almost similarly compensated in 1996. You know what I mean? Like, literally. And the world has changed for how much money these guys have made. And, we talked about Brian never taking a job again and being gone 10 years. Brian never found the right circumstance. I mean, had the Chiefs or the Vikings or the right owner or the right situation presented itself, maybe Brian would have coached again. I find it fascinating that John Gruden's going to go back and do the circus again, that he can't stay away from it, even though he was making $8 million a year broadcasting and having no, responsibility other than having a good time and being party boy and doing Corona commercials and whatnot. I'm kind of blown away, and I was blown away when Vermeil came back, and this would be like a week from now, Brian calling me and saying, I took the Bears job, dude, I can't stay away. I would be blown away. I'd be blown away if Marvin went and took the Bears job, to be honest with you, but I think Marvin would take the Cardinals job in a heartbeat, Yeah,
I think it really does speak to the passion, the work ethic, the intensity that these guys have for this profession.
It's on a different level, dude. And
it really is.
You really didn't understand that when you were a fan in the stands till you do what you do now,
Well, I mean, it's one of those things, and I've shared this story before, but I was doing the Ravens Unscripted show at the Ravens facility, probably about maybe October, somewhere along those lines.
Did you have that good-looking jacket on?
Yeah. It was like 8 o'clock at night on a Tuesday, a day where there's no media access. And I remember as I was finishing up the show, I saw Zach Orr. And, of course, Zach Orr, retired this year, has been kind of an intern for the Ravens, coaching intern. He's going to work on the scouting side in the off season. He's really, he's basically doing what Ozzie Newsome did when his career ended. He's getting a taste for it to see if he wants to work in football now as a coach or as a scout or potentially a front office executive down the line. And I remember it was 8 o'clock at night, and I said to him, hey, how's it going? And he said, I love it, but, man, I had no idea how hard these guys worked. I thought I knew how hard these coaches work and how many hours these guys work, but it's amazing. You think you put in a long day as a player, and then you realize...
you think you like your gig? What John Gruden said, you love football.
Yeah.
Do you love football? Do you eat, sleep, breed. And for him, I guess he does, and that's part of the gig when you got $112 million in the bank and you don't need to go do this, that you want to go out. And I've been to the Oakland Raiders complex. Dude, it sits at the end of a runway. Yeah. It is very, very humble. You might be different when they get to Vegas, but, if that's where you're going to go and work every day, and Gruden knows that deal, and he wants to go back and revisit 2001, I don't know. Maybe it would be fun for me to go back to the Monster Monday vault with Baldinger and live 2001 all over again. But I find it fascinating, the decisions these guys make, right? After locking themselves in a room for 35 years like Brian did or Marvin has done or Dean Pease or any of these guys, that when they get to the end, Chuck Pagano's battled cancer. He's got more money than he ever thought he was going to have. Be interesting to see if he wants to go, be the defensive coordinator of the Cardinals or something. I mean, that's an interesting situation.
It really is, and it does get to a point. Now, assistants are a different animal, but when you've been a head coach for a certain extended period of time, it really does become more of a labor of love that you want to do it. You're not going to do it for free. You're going to be compensated and compensated handsomely to do it, but you have to really want to do it. And as much as there are guys who can't stay away, Brian Billick did stay away. Bill Cowher did stay away. Tony Dungy to this point has stayed away. I mean, there are certain individuals. Jimmy Johnson, after he was done with the Dolphins, there was a lot of talk that he would coach again. He hasn't. So there are some who stay away, but it really is fascinating, the individuals who, after an extended layoff, you mentioned Dick Vermeil, John Gruden, it looks like now. I think back to Joe Gibbs coming back to the Redskins.
Right.
I mean, you've got some examples.
The ball coach.
Yeah, it's one thing to stay away for a year. It's another thing when you've been out of it for a decade.
A generation in real terms, right?
Yeah. I mean, this league changes very, very quickly. And for those individuals, it's interesting. But, in the case of someone like Chuck Pagano, does he want to take a year off, or does he want to jump right back into the fire? I mean, Gary Kubiak, you saw what happened with him. That was an ugly ending to his tenure. What had been a solid, not great, but solid tenure in Houston, goes to the Ravens, and he's a head coach a year later, and he's winning a Super Bowl 2 years later. So, it really is fascinating.
Yeah, Pete Carroll got thrown out of everywhere, including USC, and then came back and won a Super Bowl. Damn near won another one, So, it's a long road. We got a lot going on. It's been a long season for you. Rest yourself. I'm sure the Orioles are going to create some mayhem here on the trade market any day now for you.
Oh,
okay?
yeah, I can't wait. Just counting down the fan fest and being able to talk to all those Rule 5 picks they made.
Hey, don't forget to get my guy Nestor, okay? Baltimore Luke is the way to find Luke. Luke at WNST.net. Rest up, my friend. We have plenty ahead. We're going to be in Minnesota for the Super Bowl in a couple of weeks as well. Big shout out to our friends at King Discount Liquors. Give the King a ring. I went over and saw Paul King last week. I picked up 3 bottles of wine, 3 different kind of bottles of wine. It was the holidays. It was on the eve of New Year's Eve. It's crazy up in there. Get on over to Rosedale, give the King a ring. Also bought some lottery tickets because, who couldn't use $385 million or what? I don't even know what I would do with it. I would give a bunch of it to charity, I'm sure. D&L Window Tinting, 26 years of tinting everything, cars, boats, businesses. When that snow and the ice comes down and you get that squint going on in the glare, it means you need D&L Window Tinting. Go see them over in Parkville and White Marsh. Tell Jason and our friends we appreciate their support, and give them a ring as well at D&L Window Tinting. All right, I'm out in the BuyAToyota.com audio vault. Morning newspaper ships each and every morning. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. That's $10 a month. And don't forget, if there's any breaking news, Coons Ford and the WNST Tech Service will be there for that. Defensive coordinator, Machado trade. I know. Blah, 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 blah. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.